My name's Christy Howell. I work here in the Center for Sustainability, and it is my great good fortune to get to introduce Nathaniel Bozarth to all of you today. I'm Nathaniel, and I'm going to read the bio rather than ad-lib the bio. Nathaniel is a storyteller and media producer with Brainroot Light and Sound and an academic unit marketing specialist at Rockhurst University. At Brainroot Light and Sound, with his production partner Christopher Cook, Nathaniel has produced such projects as Your Fellow Americans and R.E. Dream, which explore the impact of race and immigration on opportunity and critically in America through the stories of individuals and their families across the country. Some of you may be familiar with some of that work, as he has brought that work to campus before. Nathaniel is critically concerned with contextualizing the stories he tells within the larger historical narrative of America and within the context of culture writ large. With Brainroot and the Johnson County Library, Nathaniel is currently creating an app-based driving tour of Kansas City that will delve into the history of segregation and inequality in its real estate, which will be available later this year. He also produces Wide Ruled, a podcast on the past and present of equality in education. So I'll mention one other thing. For those of you who don't follow the Student Life webpage or Facebook account, we have been posting a few different videos that Nathaniel has done in years past. So if you Google Nathaniel Bozarth, you will find some of those videos on YouTube and get to see some of the things that he's going to talk you through today in a little bit different context. So I encourage you to do that. We will have a Q&A afterward. So stick around, especially if you're here for extra credit. Do the right thing and ask the questions. And this will be available on YouTube afterward as well. Without further ado, Nathaniel.
Thank you very much. I want to start today by telling you the story about Sid Willens. So Sid Willens is still an attorney here in Kansas City. He's retired now. And Sid Willens had a really interesting career as a lawyer. He was in a small firm taking local cases. And in 1966, he decided that he would take this case that was about police brutality. That in Kansas City, Missouri, there was a black man who had been handcuffed and afterwards, after being handcuffed, was beaten, very badly beaten. And Sid picked up the case and said, man, this is wrong, we got to do something about it. He wasn't going to make any money on this case. He decided to pick it up because it was right, because he wanted the truth to be told, and he wanted this man and his family to be defended and to get justice. Ultimately, he won the case. He did have to fight the department, the police department, really hard. There was a lot of lies that he had to overcome and to prove his word over the word of the people in the police department. And again, this was back in 1966. A few years later, Lyndon B. Johnson passed an amendment to the 1968 Housing Act that implemented the Section 235 program. Sid didn't know this. Sid Willens didn't know this, but this is what's happening at the time. A very good friend of Sid comes to him and says, Sid, I know you're making okay money. I know you have some means to income. I have some investment opportunities for you. What do you say? Can you spot me $10,000, and then I'm going to make you $1,500 a profit in 90 days. It's a really good profit for just 90 days. And Sid's like, yeah, I have a line of credit at the bank downtown. Let me go get the funds from that line of credit. And sure thing, Harold. I trust you. So because Sid trusted Harold, because they had a good relationship and he believed in Harold's character, he didn't really ask much about what the investment opportunity was. He trusted him, in Sid's words, implicitly. He implicitly trusted him. So So he gets him the money, and Harold Klopper, his friend, goes, takes the money. He ends up buying a house from someone, renovating the house, flipping it, and within that 90-day period, gets Sid the profit. Then Harold comes back to Sid, gives him his money, and says, hey, I got another one. I got another opportunity. Let's do it again. And Sid's like, well, I mean, $1,500 profit, 90 days, like, that's really good use of my money. Like, sure, let's do it again. But then Sid said, if it doesn't smell good, it doesn't smell good. Like, this isn't right. Like, I shouldn't be making this much profit this quickly. What's going on here? So Sid has to go see, he finds out that we're flipping houses. Sure, can I go and like see the buyer? Can I go and see what's happening? Or rather, not the buyer, the seller. So he goes with Harold to this house where they're about to purchase the house, and they're going to renovate it and sell it. And there is a white man and his wife there, and Sid had said that in this case, like, let's offer a little less. Let's offer $5,000. We think we can buy this house for that much. But he decides to question the seller a bit. Like, so why are you selling right now? Why do you want to get out of the neighborhood? Like, what's the reason for this? And the guy says, well, I just got to get away from the black people. Although he used a different word. And in that moment, one Sid said, okay, I'm no longer offering you $5,000. How about $4,000? But the greater impact for Sid was that he started to realize that yeah, something was up, that he was doing something with his money that he didn't believe in. Ultimately, he found out that through the Section 235 program, taking advantage of that federal subsidy, and through his investment, he was helping to blockbust the east side of Kansas City. He was helping to bankroll blockbusting, where systematically the racial animus of white people was preyed upon and employed to move people out to the suburbs, to scare them away, and to sell essentially substandard housing to black folks in Kansas City. And I started by telling you that this was a guy who had, of his own free will and accord, taken up police brutality cases, not making money, but doing it because it was right. So we'll come back a little bit to Sid's story later. My background is in anthropology, the study of culture. So I want to take a moment to chat a little bit about culture, and to kind of give you guys a metaphor to think about, and this will all come together in a bit. So I like to think about culture as a moving walkway. Like, this is one of those moving walkways you see at the airport. So we don't have one in Kansas City, so other airports, bigger airports. If you're trying to get to your flight, you're walking between terminals. You're probably walking fast because you're trying to catch your flight. Then you come to this moving walkway, and now if you step onto that moving walkway, and you keep going at the same pace that you were before, without any additional effort, you'll actually be jogging. You'll be running. Or you could decide to just stand on the walkway, and then you'd still be moving forward in that same trajectory nonetheless. I want to suggest that culture is like a moving walkway. The great human walkway, the great moving walkway of all human history has brought us to this particular time and place with this particular cocktail of ideologies and religions and political boundaries, and technologies and all this stuff. And now we have no choice but to participate on this moving walkway. It has brought us here, and we are stuck on it. Everything we do either embodies or iterates all of the inherited history of where we live. So now comes the history lesson. Where do we live? So we're in Johnson County, Kansas, right? This land, of course, used to be occupied by Native Americans, and then those people were forcibly moved off through the encroachment of American land on reservations, also deemed as such by Americans. And eventually, of course, this became the territory of Kansas and then was made granted statehood by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And then, just a few miles down the road from us, in 1880, someone very important to our history was born. In fact, he was born in the same city I was born. We went to the same middle school, went to the same high school, just 108 years apart. And this guy was really hardworking from a really young age. He was a really, really high-achieving student. He was, in fact, by the age of 8, as legend has it, he had 3 jobs outside of his studies. He would take his parents' cattle out to pasture every morning, and he figured out, you know what? I could take our horse, our buggy horse, and go to my friends' houses. It's very rural Olathe at the time, and maybe I can make a little money by taking other people's cows out to pasture. So really enterprising, right? Like he's a sort of born entrepreneur. He did this as an 8-year-old. He worked at his dad's. It's called a grange shop, which is basically like a little shop for farm needs and implements and some food, dry goods and that sort of thing. And like I said, he was also achieved a lot at school. Well, this person, that's not the slide I meant to have there. So this is early Johnson County. So, like I said, he was born in Olathe, Kansas. And in between his junior and senior year, he decided to go on a trip. He saved up a lot of money because he didn't need to pay his parents any of this money that he kept making with all these jobs. So he went on a trip to Europe. He biked across Europe and he saw Paris and cities in Germany and Spain. And he started to observe all this interesting landscape. This person was J.C. Nichols. That's the slide I thought I had earlier. Does that ring a bell for anyone? Does anyone know who that is? Okay, so J.C. Nichols got his undergraduate degree from Kansas University, from KU. He ended up going on to Harvard, and there he got some ideas about how he could continue this entrepreneurial spirit he had. He got some ideas about how he could make some money. And that idea was that as the United States continued to move westward, if he could buy up land now, it would eventually, the prices would double and triple, and he could make a lot of money that way. So he tried his hand at that, and actually he failed. It was the only time in his life that he really failed at anything. He tried to get investors in his hometown of Olathe to help bankroll him doing this, getting land and reselling it at higher value at a later time, and he couldn't do it. So he set his sights on more local things, real estate in Kansas City. That's maybe where you've heard about him from. But of course, the way that he would go about doing things in Kansas City would be informed by the moving walkway, that cultural metaphor, the moving walkway on which he had arrived to his particular time and place. So now we're in the very beginning of the 20th century. And there was something that really interesting and unfortunate that had happened at the end of the 20th century. And that was that one deceitful, dangerous narrative had been exchanged for another with regards to African Americans in this country. At the end of slavery, black folks were considered across the board in the United States to be objects of pity and inferior human beings in need of white people and religion to uplift them. Again, this was a false, deceitful narrative, a narrative intended to subjugate people, to keep them in subjugation. That one false narrative was exchanged for another one at the end of the 20th century, mainly to keep black and white workers in the South from organizing. Black and white workers in the South were really white workers in the South were learning black folks are just like us, cool. We're both in the factories working, we're both doing farm work together, whatever it may have been. So we can organize, get higher wages, cool, this is great. But large corporations, political parties decided, we can't let this happen. They will have too much power. The laborers in the South will have too much power if they organize black and white. So we got to change that narrative. We got to find a stronger narrative to separate them. So what they did was that they created propagandic publications that spewed out these images and ideas that black people were not objects of pity, were not inferior human beings, but they were dangerous and they were sexually rabid, and you didn't want to be near them because it was infectious. One false narrative was exchanged for another false narrative. That very same idea about black folks still pervades our media to this day, and it most certainly affected J.C. Nichols and other real estate developers like him when he went about doing his work. He just wanted to follow best practices. So what were the best practices? Well, J.C. Nichols knew that when he had gone to Europe, he had noticed these cities that had been there for ages, that had kept their value, that had where the city was sort of, there was a city center that was beautiful, and there were residential areas, and they were separate and not together, and that needed to happen in the United States. But it wasn't happening, because he had seen in the United States how we would have areas become industrialized very quickly, so that you may have a residential area that just a few years later would have a big apartment complex created in a residential area that would now overshadow the homes. Or there was nothing stopping someone from coming into a neighborhood, buying up a plot of land, and creating a pig farm there. So they came up with something called restrictive covenants. But these restrictive covenants weren't just about land use. They were also about race, racially restrictive covenants. This is a map of Kansas City showing how they implemented some of those land use regulations. Through a system, so J.C. Nichols, as he innovated on racially restrictive covenants, he also gained power throughout the country because he perfected them. They existed across the country, but J.C. Nichols and Kansas City, by way of him, perfected the racially restrictive housing covenant. They made them permanent. And it was this whole idea of planning for permanence is what J.C. Nichols always said. So that in other cities where restrictive covenants would only last for 25 years, in Kansas City they became self-renewing, so that they still exist in deeds across the city, in Johnson County, in Kansas City, Missouri, to this day. And then J.C. Nichols, and this is what this map refers to, J.C. Nichols worked with mortgage lenders to align the covenants and the land use ideas with lending practices. So that on this map, if in these green areas, in these green residential areas, those are racially homogeneous areas, this sort of map would have been used by a bank to gauge the riskiness of sending out a loan. If the area is marked green, it's safe. And if an area is marked green, it's racially homogeneous. It's a white neighborhood, all white neighborhood. If it's mixed, if it was a racially mixed neighborhood, it'd be blue or yellow because that neighborhood is in transition. And it wasn't a safe investment for some reason. For some reason not substantiated by any sociological study. For some reason not substantiated by any of the character or the quality of the residents in the neighborhood. It was arbitrary. It was because of, again, this moving walkway on which he was moving, this narrative which he and other real estate like him had adapted. And if it was red, if it was marked red, these were black neighborhoods. These were Hispanic neighborhoods. These were neighborhoods that were clearly not going to keep their value, according to J.C. Nichols, other land developers, and mortgage lenders across the country. The real estate product made available to black folks in Kansas City was very different than the real estate product made available to white folks. To white folks, they were given these gorgeous neighborhoods. They were where they were able to get cheap mortgages subsidized by the government vis-a-vis maps like this, vis-a-vis the property appraisal, the mortgage practices, white people were able to get much cheaper mortgages, much better interest rates. And J.C. Nichols really did create beautiful neighborhoods. He was really innovative that way, and he thought that he was doing the United States a favor. One of the things that you see throughout Kansas City is that in his neighborhood, so Mission Hills and parts of Leawood and Prairie Village, sorry, not Leawood, he didn't develop Leawood. Prairie Village, Mission Hills, Brookside, you see all these curvilinear streets, so it's not a grid. That was this thing where he thought he was going to be planning for beauty, creating beauty in the neighborhood by letting the streets contour with the naturally occurring hills and leaving trees that had been there so that he didn't chop down trees that had been there for hundreds of years, as had previously been the real estate practice in the country. That's part of why he had power throughout the country, because he would then go sit on boards at the National Association of Real Estate Boards or the Homeowners Loan Corporation, and he would then, because he believed he was doing the best thing, he would then go and propagate his ideas, suggesting that real estate people and mortgage lenders across the country should follow his practices. As I said, the real estate properties made available to black folks in Kansas City were extremely different. Because of this persistent discrimination and lending practices, black folks were forced to work with illegitimate mortgage lenders. They didn't have the option to put 50 down on a house, to put 10% down on a new house. They had to put 50 down. Or they had interest rates. It would be astronomical. So oftentimes, on the east side of Kansas City, when black folks moved into new neighborhoods, they weren't able to keep their homes because of the terms of the mortgage that were unfair and unequal. And for that reason, and for a slew of other reasons, a slew of other complex reasons, not relating to the quality or the character of the residents, the neighborhoods on the black side of town have fallen into disrepair over time. I'll list off really quick some of the reasons. So persistent discrimination in mortgage practices, a system of property appraisal that explicitly discriminates on basis of skin color, because of absentee landlords, because of a lack of available jobs and opportunities for improvement. But for all these reasons and so many more, there became a visible difference in our neighborhoods in the city. And that's a really big problem. When you drive through J.C. Nichols suburbia, the adjectives that come to mind are words like tidy, respectable, successful, clean. But when you drive through the bad parts of our city, when you drive through the black neighborhoods on the east side of Troost, the words that come to mind might be untidy, unsuccessful, disrespectful, and so on. And when we have such a divided city with such clear differences between the white side of town and the black side of town, those same adjectives get worn on people's skin by no choice of the wearers, by no reflection of the character or quality of the wearers. That's the moving walkway that affects our culture today. That's how the built space affects how we relate with other human beings. I've got to look at my notes for a minute. So, when we peel back history this way, we begin to understand how we got here. We begin to understand some of the social problems that persist. And we want a quick fix, right? Like we're like, okay, we can agree this is a problem, right? I hope that you believe I've laid the case for why this is a really big problem. And maybe you all already believe that. The thing about a systemic problem that is this deep and abiding is that there isn't a quick fix. It took us hundreds of years to get to this place. In fact, it's built into American culture, into the American way of life, that white folks subjugate and put down and segregate. We find ever more innovative ways to do that. So what I'm going to suggest today, I've never done this talk with slides before, so I just missed all the interesting slides you could have looked at, so I apologize for that. Why did it die? So what I'm going to suggest today is that the way that we can change things, and actually let me pause for a minute and say, I'm clearly a white person, right? So when I give this talk, I like to give this talk to this is a majority white room, and this talk is mostly for the white folks, right? Like I just want to own that and say that this talk is for the white folks because racism is a white people problem. It's not a problem that people of color in this country should have to own. It's a problem that white people promulgate and persist. So the difference between the moving walkway at the airport and the moving walkway that we move on is that it's moved by us, right? It's moved by our 2 feet and our actions and how we act. So whereas I don't believe that we can get off the moving walkway and suddenly change and suddenly extract ourselves from culture, we can do things to change the trajectory of the moving walkway. And the main thing that I believe that we can do is to take it personally as white people. Because the problem with whiteness and the idea of whiteness being normal is we don't have to think about it all the time. Because we just get to, I get to leave here, someone who cares deeply and who does what I can to try to fight against racism, but I still get to leave here and be white. I still get to leave here and drive in my car somewhere. And if a police pulls me over, I don't have to worry about my life. I need to remind myself of my whiteness and figure out ways to take racism personally for me. Here's a few ways that I would suggest you do that. 1, listen to people. And I mean listen to people and don't invalidate their stories. Listen to people who have been oppressed. If someone comes to you and is telling a story of how someone was racist towards them, you don't get the option to tell them that it wasn't racist. Sorry, no, you just don't get to do that. You need to listen, validate, and let it percolate inside you so that you understand. If you feel the urge to negate their story, you need to interrogate that urge. You need to figure out why did you want to negate them? Why did you feel like you wanted to say, no, it wasn't racism? Because I believe that probably what's driving that is that you feel a measure of guilt, and you don't want to address that guilt. Other things you can do. Read books and listen to speakers and authors, podcasts, where you can peel back the layers of history and understand other perspectives. That's a huge tool that we have open to us. As a white male, I probably read more books authored by black folks than anything else, because I realize that, again, if I don't work to remind myself of difference and inequity that persists, it's not going to be at top of mind for me, and I'm not going to remember when it counts. And here's a moment like when it would count. So a buddy of mine works at a coffee shop. It's a bakery. And I was so proud of him the other day because he has been able to build this self-awareness, this understanding of what whiteness is in himself, so that he was able to recognize his bias. So he works at a bakery, and it's in Brookside. And if a white person comes in, he assumes that they're probably doing well financially, so that when they ask for a cake, he shows them what they have. He doesn't discuss price. He's just, he just puts it out there for them. But if a black client comes in and they ask for a cake, he recognized that instantly in his brain he thinks, oh, I need to be considerate of this person and considerate of their financial situation, so I should probably be more upfront and more quick to tell them the price, just so that they know they're not getting it over the head. Interestingly, there's a note there that he feels like he's trying to serve them, right? There's a note there that he's trying to do well by them. But on a deeper level, he recognizes that that feeling that he's following a best practice, or that feeling that he is doing, that he's well-intentioned, actually comes from bias. That's the sort of thing that I think if you begin to remind yourself of, as a white person, remind yourself of your whiteness and remind yourself of the history of how we've gotten there, you'll have more moments like that where you recognize, oh my God, that came from my bias. I produce a lot of content. I do a lot of projects trying to advance a more just and equitable world, to trying to tell stories like this one that I've told today about inequity and bias and structural racism. But the thing is that no matter how much work I do, at the end of the day, because of this moving walkway that I'm on, I believe that till I die, I will still be a racist, essentially. Because I know that I have layers and layers of inherited bias and racism that live inside of me, and that it will take me the rest of my life to undo those things, to unravel that bias. And I think that's the greatest good that I can ever do, and that is how I plan to change the path of the moving walkway. Thank you guys so much. I would love to take some questions.
I'll start with one to sort of help us start the conversation, if I can find where I just wrote it in my notes. Nathaniel, you mentioned reading and how important
Yes.
sort of getting into sources and paying attention to the literature is. What would you recommend as a good place for some of our students to start, especially with our region in mind, perhaps?
Sure. If you want a fairly academic look at how Kansas City set the gold standard for racially restrictive covenants, Kevin Fox Gotham's Race, Real Estate, and Uneven Development is the kind of the gold standard, I think. If you want something that's a little less sociological and easy to read, there's a great book by someone who's, where are you from again? Yeah, he's from the same state as you. Okay, from a Mississippi native, Tanner Colby. Some of My Best Friends Are Black, which is a hilarious book to read. Actually, I have a more hilarious book to read. So anyway, he's an excellent writer. Writes it like a story. It's a story of I think it's like the failed story of integration in America, and he covers education, real estate, and one other thing. I forgot what the other topic is, but he does feature Kansas City. It's a very easy read, a really great book. Another one that I like to recommend, and this one is hilarious. I was sitting at a public park in Kansas City, and a group of white people walked by me who I just barely know. They don't really know me, don't really know a lot about my work, and I'm reading a book that's called How to Be Black. So yeah, you can imagine that was kind of funny when they asked me, "Hey, what are you reading?" Like, no, don't ask me right now. But it's by a black comedian, Baratunde Thurston, and it's just a beautiful as a white person, beautiful, heartbreaking account that he infuses with a lot of humor about what it's like to be black in America. And there's I thought some really amazing takeaways, even for sort of everyday life as a white person dealing with people of color and being more basically he just rips on white folks several times to say, like, look, this is how y'all messed up and how you're hurting us in the workplace and so on and so forth, and expecting me as a black man to speak for all the black men in the room, that sort of thing, or all black people everywhere. So there was 3.
On the terms of media, you talked about podcasts. Do you have any suggestions for podcasts that go into this topic? Sure.
So I'll always suggest my own. For one, Wide Ruled focuses on the past, present, and future of equality in education. So it's equity issues in education. There's a really good one. So again, that's just education, though. There's a really good one out of St. Louis called We Live Here that was sort of born out of Ferguson. That does a really good job of telling mainly St. Louis stories, but again, doing a really good job to chronicle the fights of underrepresented and unlistened to people in St. Louis. So Tanner Colby and Baratunde Thurston, so two authors that I mentioned, had a podcast that doesn't exist anymore, but they have a ton of backlogged content that's fantastic, called the conversations we have when we have conversations about race. I think was the title of it, which if you search for About Race podcast, you'll find it. And it's, again, a really, really good, sometimes really uncomfortable podcast. I think mostly uncomfortable because Tanner Colby is such a intense person, and so he will forge ahead and say stupid things, and then Baratunde Thurston will tell him he's being stupid. It's fantastic. So I would recommend those three: Wide Ruled, About Race, and We Live Here.
So I was really interested in what you said about how political parties felt imperiled by the potential of laborers gaining power, deeply Marxist. Can you tell me more about sort of like what the evidence is behind that story? Because if I'm going to teach it, I have to be able to back it up.
I don't know that I have the evidence to tell you about that right now. I believe it was, I didn't get all of my information for this talk from podcasts and documentaries, nor a single piece of media. But the 13th is a really great documentary. I don't know if you watched that already, but they do go into that a bit. I believe the 13th covers not the origination, but the sort of continued effort of political parties to use coded terms to split people up. I believe they start with talking about the war on poverty and how that was actually targeted towards black people in our urban cores. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have better sources for that. Other questions?
Good. I was going to say, I can browbeat people into asking questions.
So I am in a forum about the American Dream.
Oh, cool.
And over the last couple of weeks, I feel like my idea of what that is has changed a lot. And in just learning about our history and things like redlining and things that have happened that I just didn't know about. So I just wanted to ask you, like, with your background and everything you just told us today, what would your idea of the American Dream be?
Awesome. So I don't even know if I said this. It's fun that you asked that, because these two series are all about asking people their ideas about the American Dream. So you saw Redream through that, or no? Okay. So if for a resource for you, every single there's 40 different videos from all over the country as a part of Redream, and they're all asking people what their idea of the American Dream is, and what obstacles are in their way, what opportunities are helping them get there. So I have a hard time with the American Dream, right? Because it's crazy. Doing this project, and again, producing stories all over the country, I was really, really surprised that there were people who I thought just got totally effed, like by America, by our society, by our particular moving walkway. And yet, at the end of the interview, I would ask them about their story, and then at the end of the interview, I'd be like, hey, so what do you think about this idea of the American Dream? What is it? They would give their explanation, and then it would be, is it true? Is it a real thing? Is it really accessible? And these people who had what seemed to me like lives where they had been just pummeled with bias and discrimination, they would still say yes, which is really interesting. I can't have that optimism as an outside viewer. I think someone mentioned Marxism. This is kind of a Marxist idea, that the idea of the American dream is sort of the bread and games that we get from the media and the American legacy to sort of pacify us, to sort of keep us civil. The bread and games, you know what I'm talking about? Bread and games, so late Roman Empire, bread and games, the Colosseum. This was a way to sort of keep the people civil by numbing them. And I kind of think that's what the American dream is like. Like, it's, sure, every once and again, there's going to be someone who can go rags to riches. We love those stories. They're inspiring. I'm never going to stop enjoying them. But I think it's a farce. Like, I think it's a pacifying narrative. Yeah, yeah.
Wait.
You got to get the microphone, sorry.
Where did you and where do you recommend us look to learn about the economic processes that drain assets and value from predominantly black neighborhoods?
I would suggest, again, I'll again suggest race, or, oh my gosh, I forgot it. The Kevin Fox Gotham book. Race, real estate, and uneven development. Thanks. I was about to say the tagline of one of my things, my projects, and I was like, that's not it. That'd be a great place to start. You could research the history of the Homeowners Loan Corporation. You could research the history of the National Association of Real Estate Boards. I'll elaborate just a little bit on something. So, if you bought a home in Prairie Village, Prairie Village was built with the GI Bill in mind, so that veterans from the integrated armed forces, white veterans from the integrated armed forces, would come to Prairie Village and be able to use the GI Bill to pay, to basically give them their down payment for a home that was fairly affordable, was very affordable, and that had a really low interest rates. They would be, I believe those homes were in somewhere between like 20 and 40,000 when they were built. And now Prairie Village homes are $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. So that's an incredible growth in wealth. So if you were a World War II veteran, you came back, you bought that home, you had this crazy growth in equity, then you probably stayed in that home. You were able to then pass it on to your children. That is an amazing amount of wealth that your children are able to inherit. Across the country, black families tend to inherit debt, whereas white families tend to inherit wealth on the average. If you were a black family in Kansas City and you moved into Sid Willens' neighborhood, the neighborhood where Sid Willens was bankrolling blockbusting, then you moved into a house that was fairly cheap, but then you had a mortgage with ridiculous interest rates, and most importantly, even if you got through your mortgage and you paid and that was all hunky-dory, you were in a place that was redlined. So your property value would never go up. So now, even if you retain the house, and even if your children inherit it, they're not inheriting as much wealth, if at all. That's where there's a big gap. That's what I think you could flesh out more with and read up on. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Wait, it's down here.
I'm hard of hearing. I can't hear without the microphone.
So I was just curious because I'm an anthropologist myself, and I've been to a lot of cool places, and I've had people come up to me and tell me that I have this sort of like white savior complex, and I recognize that, and I can see that, but I don't know how to balance the sort of white savior complex with actually advocating for disadvantaged peoples. So I was wondering if you had any experience with that at all.
That's a good one. So part of the reason that I couch my talk for white people is because I recognize that I am going to understand how white people think better, and I believe I know that I won't be doing a white savior complex if I talk as a white person to white people to fix a problem. That's white people. Problem is white people. White people in power. I think maybe the antidote to, do you have thoughts? You have thoughts.
Well, I do. So one recommendation that I always give my students when you are in a position where you have white privilege and you know that you have it, use that privilege to get on the stage and then step back and open that stage up. Empower other voices. Don't let your voice lead. And that's probably one of the toughest lessons especially for younger folks starting out looking at ways they can be good agents, especially for their peers. That's one of the really hard things for folks to do, right? But get comfortable with your own discomfort, sit in it a little bit, roll around in it, get comfortable with being awkward and uncomfortable, and then step back and say, okay, person, you now have a stage, and I'm going to make sure that everyone here listens to you, because it's not my story to tell, it's yours. So that's it's a hard lesson to learn, but it's an incredibly valuable one. And learning it as a historian, for me, probably looked different than learning it as an anthropologist, but it was still equally valuable.
I think it's a great answer. And without knowing more about the context of where you're being told that, it's sort of hard to give more of an answer. I'll just add, I think when you listen to other people and let them speak, you are empowering them. When you validate their story, you are empowering them. And that I think is really important. And also, as a function of listening, you got to make sure, and again, you might not be doing this, so this may just totally be, throw this out. You got to let people have the primary stake in their own solutions. I think like the arch evil of white saviorism is if I go into a place, don't take the time to listen to people, and then come up with a solution and say, look, I have a solution for you, and then drop it on them. I'm sure that you wouldn't be that brazen anyway, but just watch out for, I guess, doing that in little ways. Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Please.
Cool. Okay. So this is, I've never done this before. This is kind of a fun thing that I just thought of. I wonder if there's anyone who has any action steps they'd like to share. Like, is there anyone that after hearing me chat a little about this today is like, man, I'm going to go out and do this thing to take racism personally. Is there anyone who would be bold and has a thought of something that they're going to make a change or start trying to do?
One thing that I really enjoy doing is, and I should do more of, is going to the east side of town and empowering businesses by spending my money there, yes. Getting coffee, getting a haircut. There's so many tiny, like, non-discreet places that nobody knows about that do wonderful things, and it's a way to have a conversation, to be somebody, I guess, empower them.
That's huge. Yeah, make your money count. I love that you said that. Yeah. And you don't have to go to and I would add, because I know where Matt lives. For those of you that don't live in Kansas City, Missouri, like, you can make those sort of decisions here in Johnson County too. Like, find businesses owned by people of color and make your money count. Put your money in their businesses. That's huge, because that's another way that when we talk about the wealth gap, like, historically, again, we're going Marxist again, the means of power, the means of, what's the word I want to use? The means of production have been in the hands of white folks, so that white wealth controls our businesses across the country. So by making our money count in businesses owned by people of color, we're helping to just in a very easy way trying to dismantle that just a bit. So thanks for bringing that up.
Who's going to take a sociology class? It's hard to not be an academic, right? Other ideas from this side of the room?
And even from the table in the back.
I've tried, y'all. This is a safe space. You can mention ideas.
Well, thank you guys so much. It was really great to. Yeah, are you gonna wait it out more?
No, I'm fine. Go ahead.
Well, thanks, guys. I was just gonna say thanks for having me. Check out some of my other work. Take racism personally, and let's change the direction of that moving walkway. Thanks, guys.